So hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the third part in the BI strategy series we've been doing. And today we'll focus on talking about empowering users. My name is Amanda Teschko, and I am a consultant with Thorogood. I've been working for Thorogood for a number of years, helping our enterprise customers implement business intelligence strategies and solutions. And I'm joining today's webcast from our Philadelphia office. So for today's session, I'll start with just a quick introduction to Thorogood, and then I'll talk a little bit about the case for user empowerment and why we're seeing so many customers really need to invest a bit to ensure that that is happening successfully in the organization. We'll take a look at a couple of the elements that are core to figuring out how to program within your organization, and then we'll show you a sample approach, which was derived from a program that we did with one of our large financial services customers. So to start off, we'll just talk a bit about Thorogood. For those of you who don't know Thorogood, we are an independent global professional services firm, and we specialize in business intelligence and analytics, strategies, solutions, and services. As you can see, we've been doing this for a little over 30 years now. We are a global company, so we have offices in London, New York, Philadelphia, where I'm joining you from today, Singapore, Sao Paulo in Brazil, and also Bangalore in India. And we offer a full range of BI and analytics services. That includes things like strategies and roadmaps, so things that we're kind of touching on in this series, as well as full implementation, so through requirement development and testing. We also do quite a bit in the training, user empowerment, and support area, which we'll also speak a bit about today. And I think you'll see as I kind of walk through some of our sample approaches, our philosophy at Thorogood is really strongly rooted in ensuring that solutions are delivered in a way that gives careful consideration to the breadth of technical possibilities, but is really strongly guided by the business goals and value delivery. We work with a number of blue chip customers, and those draw from a range of different sectors. The sectors we most commonly work with are consumer goods, pharma and life sciences, financial services, and insurance. And this will just give you a bit of context so you know some of the types of customers we're working with when I'm drawing on some of our experiences today. And lastly, we are an independent consultancy in that we work with a range of different technology partners, and our consultants are knowledgeable and experienced in a wide breadth of those technologies and really put a lot of focus on being able to integrate those technologies successfully in enterprise applications. So I've listed some of the technologies and partners that we work with here, which include back-end, front-end, and analytics-driven technologies. So with that, we'll get into the session for today. We'll start off by talking a little bit about the case for user empowerment. Now, for those of you who've joined for the first two sessions, you may have seen this slide, but I think it's a good one to set the context for today's session as well. And that's really considering the different types of users that exist in your organization. So if you consider a continuum of types of users where we have your consumers on the left-hand side and your analysts on the right, in putting together a user empowerment program, it's really important to think about the different types of users that exist in the organization and the different needs that they might have. So if we think about our user base on the left-hand side, people who are just consuming more of productionized reports, they may be more structured reports, they may apply some filters, but they're not kind of particularly savvy. And you may have a very broad range of users using these types of reports. As we move more towards the middle, we may have fewer users here, but more power user types. So those who are doing ad hoc analytics and BI, they may be using tools like Tableau to explore the data or pivot tables on top of different models to be able to kind of drag and drop. You may have fewer of these in your organization, but we're seeing a lot of people placing a lot of emphasis on growing this pool. And then on the right-hand side, you may have your most niche user base. You can think of these as your data scientists, a pretty small number of users usually within organizations, but ones that have a very deep understanding of math and different statistical models. And we like to think of this as a continuum, so these aren't kind of discrete buckets. And it's important when thinking about your user empowerment strategy, how you cater for not just these kind of slices of user types, but everything that might kind of fall in between as well. And we think something that we've seen people place a lot of focus on is both increasing the number of users in each of these buckets, but also starting to shift the user base kind of up the curve a bit. So how do you get some of your broad user base doing more analytics, getting more comfortable with self-service and ad hoc? And then also, how do you take some of your power users and start to get them to be able to do more advanced analytics? And we are running a session in a few weeks' time on this concept, which is creating citizen data scientists within your organization. And that really focuses on taking people from that middle pool and being able to start to train them in more math and statistical backgrounds so that they can go up that curve a bit more. So that might be something that you're interested in if that's the jump that's of interest to you for this session. So when we really started having a number of these conversations with our customers, a lot of them began in the same place. And that's really that many people over the past decade have started to invest quite a bit in a technology platform that enables self-service within their organization. And that may be things like investing to get data in a proper form that users can access it in an easy way. So that might be through semantic layers or OLAP models, and also putting some top-of-the-line technologies on top of it, so things like Tableau, Power BI, Click. And what we found is the argument to put those platforms in place in many organizations has been a pretty compelling one. I mean, it's clear that there's a lot of value in becoming more data-driven. But many people, when making that investment in the technology, have a sense in mind of the type of value it will return, but don't give kind of proper thought to what needs to happen to your user base to be able to maximize that investment. And so what we found is that when you have that investment of technology, a number of our customers had either a small number of users or pretty low skill level user base using it, and the output was some valuable insights. But once that investment in technology has already been made, there's no reason why it can't generate kind of greater insights. And in many ways, once you have your technology base right, the insights that come out of that investment are really a function of the number of users and the skill level of those users. And so in order to really kind of maximize that investment, you've got to think about how can your company train and support more and better equipped power users. And that will just amplify the impact of the investment that's been made. And so working out how to do this is really going to be different for every organization. And the investment you make in it is largely going to be driven by what the value of these better equipped power users are to your organization. So what's the value in having those added valuable insights on the other side of this? And that's really led us to another pretty interesting discussion with our customers, and that's really what is the value of a power user. In order to assess really how much time or how much money you put into getting those users up to speed, it's important to kind of consider what achieving those goals would mean for your organization. So what we find is that many of our customers were asking to have more power users, so increasing the number of users, to have them be more confident, so both in their own ability to use the tools, but also in the data that the tools are displaying, and then better enabled, so to be able to move more on their own, so have to depend less on others to be able to do some of the analyses that they need. And it's not always something that's easy to kind of quantify or put a dollar amount to, but I do encourage you to kind of consider what are those things worth within your organization. And what we saw as we had these conversations is that there are some pretty common benefits that have applied really across a range of different customer types and different sectors. And it's really had an impact on two axes. So the first is that if you increase the number and skill level of your power users, you would expect that you could increase the speed with which decisions can be made, and also the quality of those decisions. And that's beneficial to the organization in such a way that you're able to recognize more opportunities to maybe reduce any unnecessary costs, or maybe to drive additional revenue for the organization. So having those users, in some instances, we've seen just putting in self-service platforms have contributed to programs that have been able to save like millions of dollars when negotiating new contracts, or be able to generate new revenue. And so if you can start to consider what those things might be, even if it's not putting a dollar amount to it, that starts to help make a case for why there's value in having more users who can create those insights within your organization. But then on the other axis, there's also a pretty interesting play with IT. And we found that there's a lot of value to organizations in being able to reduce their dependence on IT and the costs that are associated with that. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you can downsize your IT organization, but we know that in today's market, there's an increasing amount of data. There are new data sources really being available all the time, and there's really more and more pressure on IT to provision that data and respond quickly to new critical value-add needs of the organization. And so by reducing the number of requests on your IT department for things like pools of data or basic reports, things that are just kind of keeping the status quo going, it really allows IT organizations to be able to prioritize some of that critical value-add activity that's really important for the organization and differentiating itself from others in your category. And if you can, ensure that that department is no longer hampered down by that influx of requests, it offers quite a bit of incentive for the organization. And so I think we can see there's quite a bit of benefit in getting this argument right. So thinking about the value of the power user in your organization and what it means for your company. And it will have a different meaning for different individuals. But if you can use that, that will start to guide your decisions that you make in terms of how much you actually invest in this type of program. And so once you've kind of gotten clear or happy in your mind about the type of investment that you're willing to make, so how much of people's time, how many people, then it's important to start thinking about how do we actually do this? So what would contribute to a program that is going to actually get people up that curve and generate those results rather than just, be a check in the box to say we did training. So in this next section, we're going to look at some of the considerations for a successful empowerment program. And so in this, we're going to look at a couple key areas. We're going to start by looking at strategy and enrollment, so getting the plans right, how you determine who comes into the program, doing some bit of foundational learning, so there does need to be some live kind of traditional type training, a focus on continuing that learning, so thinking of ways to make sure that users have an ability to continue to move up that learning curve after that initial training, and to do all of this within a sphere of community and best practices so that it's being done responsibly and in a way that encourages people to work together and collaborate. And so let's explore each of these areas a little bit more, and we can talk about some of the considerations you may have when thinking about these different sections. So if we start off by thinking about strategy enrollment, one of the first things that is important to consider is where will the users come from? So it's important that the investment the company makes in developing the skills of its users is seen through to the end. So it's extremely important that you bring the right people into the program. And this could be done in a couple of different ways. We've worked with customers where it's done by self-enrollment, so asking who wants to do this. Or you may also consider doing it by nomination. So perhaps it's part of your HR process or your line management program. It may be, a nomination from a department head or a supervisor. There's sort of an obvious psychology, I think, in ensuring that the users feel proud to be chosen or accepted into the program because you will get a greater commitment to them. And in many ways, the investment that you make in them will outlive the life of the program. So for every year they're committed to being a power user within your organization, the greater value that you achieve from that individual user. You may also want to consider, obviously, what sorts of characteristics make a good power user. So I've listed a couple here, but it may be important to sit down within your company and think about what would contribute to a good power user in your organization. Is it an analytic ability, the ability to collaborate, deep business understanding? It may be slightly different for every company, but it would be good to kind of align on what it is that you think may make somebody good for being a part of this program. And then it's also really important in this phase to consider how success is defined. And that means both for an individual entering the program, but for the program itself as well. So, for example, in one program that we were working on, we were assessing users after each training session, and we were giving them a level of accreditation based on where they were in the program. So for measuring the success of the program as a whole, we would then conduct interviews with executives. We would monitor the usage of self-service tools and the number of requests to IT. And again, this will be different for every organization, but if you can sit down and think up front, how will you be able to track some of the success of this? Because it can feel like a bit of an intangible thing to invest in kind of capability development within your organization, but if you can find some things within the company that will act as indicators of if it's working or not, that tends to be a good way to ensure that you can assess the progress of the program and make adjustments where it's needed. Then once you have enrollment and strategy down, it's important to give your users a base of learning across relevant technologies and data sources. In many ways, this foundational learning phase may be similar to the traditional type of training that you're used to. So it may be kind of live training courses. You may consider whether those are done in person or virtually. So if this is a global program, there may be some considerations that will impact those things. You may consider if they are live courses or if they're recordings that people are watching on demand. Class size is important to consider there as well, so how many people can you support in some of these different classes? So there are a number of kind of considerations that you may have when thinking about any sort of training program for this foundational phase. But something that we think is really important is to make sure that the curriculum is kind of custom and tailored to the business user's needs. So whereas some traditional training may use, like, say, sample data and focus on one specific technology. So, for example, we may be doing Tableau training on an AdventureWorks or a generic data set. What we've really found is that a training course is much more likely to be successful when the training material is tailored to your specific data, so using real data sets that exist within your organization, and when you're doing that with a combination of technologies that are actually used within the company. When you do it that way, it feels more real for the users, so you've already started to build up the familiarity, not just with the tool and the technology, but the way that they would use it within your actual landscape. And I think it's important to remember that kind of the learning doesn't stop here, so a number of companies kind of stop after the live training phase, and I think it's just important to remember that it is a journey, and so in many ways, it's the continued learning that is really kind of critical to success. And that may mean a number of different things. So we've done, with one customer, we offered kind of live one-on-one support or coaching after the foundational learning. And in talking to one of our customers recently, they had kind of expressed some frustration that they would invest in training users, and some of the users would use the tool for a day or two afterwards and then give up. And others they would find might get kind of 80% of the way through a report and get stuck. And really without having somebody to call on, it was making it hard for users to know how to get over that bump in the road when they hit it. And some users didn't even kind of really know where to start. So by offering coaching or some sort of live help as needed, the users really have somebody that they can reach out to at any point to help them in their journey. And then another aspect you may consider is hosting a bit of an on-demand knowledge center, so having a one-stop shop for all of their training needs. And you may store things here like past training courses, overviews of new features or new versions of the tool. By giving users like a place to go when they get stuck, we find that can help encourage them to really continue on that journey. So it may be important from the beginning to think about how you continue the learning after some of that initial training is done and what sorts of foundations you may need to put in place in your organization to allow for that type of change. And then really kind of going hand in hand with that encouragement aspect is the importance of establishing a community around self-service. And something we've seen clients struggle with is really getting started with this. So is it done locally or globally? It may be something that you want to do, but there are other priorities that keep getting in the way. Something we actually did for one of our clients is owned and helped them build a community, which may sound a bit counterintuitive to have somebody from the outside kind of come in and help with it, but it was a good way for them to kind of kickstart the program. And we did things like set up regional user groups. We would host events and social events, and really help them by kind of maintaining active blogs so that they could showcase what's going on in the community. We also tied in the coaching element to that. So you may want to think about how can you build a network of people that will continue to kind of sustain this practice and will continue to build off of each other and collaborate. I think that can be done in a number of different ways. And then lastly, we'll talk just a bit about best practices. So many of the concerns over self-service, I would say, particularly from IT departments, are usually around how do you ensure that the tools are used responsibly? It's important to consider how you might build best practices into the training curriculum so that it's really ingrained in the user's minds. And you might consider doing things like only allowing publishing rights to users after certain courses are taken or passed. So there are things that you might build into your program that help with that best practice element. Similarly, you may consider how to ensure that there are standards not just around the use of tools, but the experience. So things like making sure branding and visualization best practices are taken into account. And these can be included in your training curriculum, but they can also have different processes put in place in your organization to make sure that anything that is user-generated may be segregated from IT-generated content or may have a path for a QA check before it gets shared with a wide user group. So now that we've taken a look at those different pillars, let's look at how it might kind of manifest itself into a real program. And what I'm going to take you through here is just looking at those pillars in the context of a program that we put together for a large financial services company that we work with. And you can see, I'll go through these just kind of quickly in each of the individual sections, but you can see I've kind of organized them by the pillars we have there to show the different elements that were kind of aligned to those things. In this particular program, we started doing an enrollment and assessment phase. In this, we defined the curriculum. So this curriculum included a range of different Microsoft technologies, as well as things like Tableau that the users would be using. We put an enrollment strategy in place that would kind of identify the types of users and mapped that to the curriculum definition. We also did an assessment of the users coming in so that we understood kind of what track they should fall into and what types of courses were most appropriate for them. We then moved on to doing foundational training sessions, and we did these sessions live. And because this was a pretty large global program that spans a pretty large part of their business, we did them virtually and on a range of different basic and intermediate topics. Then from a continued learning perspective, we put together an on-demand knowledge center. So that was a portal in SharePoint where all of the training content was shared, where we had a place to post updates or quick videos for how to do things. We also put in place real-time coaching support, so almost done as like an office hours where people could call in and get help if they were working on a project. There were set amounts of time each day that people could call in and use that. And then we also focused on community and best practices. So with the community, we had set up a blog and different email groups. We also had events for people to share what they had been working on and different lunch and learns. And from a best practice perspective, we made sure that all of the foundational training included best practice standards, and that anybody who had permissions to create their own content and to publish it had to go through those different standards courses. So we covered quite a bit in a pretty short amount of time. I'll just cover some of the key elements of it. We talked about how making the training program real will really help with user adoption, so something to keep in mind. We mentioned that you really do need support when you need support, so ensuring that there is some sort of live coaching option available for your users, or that there's an on-demand center that they can go to when they need it, very important. It is a bit of a journey, so we've got to expect that people are not just doing the foundational training, but that they've got a mechanism in place to continue their training and to continue to evolve. Everything is better with company, so building that community around it I think is very important to keeping it going. Some of the organizations who we've seen do self-service most successfully have a very strong community built around it that just keeps people interested and continually evolving. And then responsibility is required. So with self-service does open it up for people to make mistakes or to do things incorrectly, and there has to be processes put in place to ensure that things are done in a good and responsible way, and that people know and are trained in how to handle those things. So as I mentioned, my name is Amanda Teschko. I'll leave my contact information on the screen here in case you have any questions and want to reach out. And thank you again for joining us today.